Hey guys, it's M4J here and welcome back to the M4J network here on OpenTTD. Today is a 4-part episode. Some bits are quite long, some bits are quite short. Basically, we are doing 4 things, hence the 4 parts. First thing we're doing, as you see on the screen right now, we are connecting the new cross-country west platforms at Motherboard Falls. This is particularly for trains that travel up from the south side of the map up the west coast towards Sunnington, except they don't reach Sunnington. Well, some will reach Sunnington via the link that we've got there, but most will actually terminate here at Motherboard Falls using the platforms that used to be used by the Trans-Rapid network, which, as you remember, way back when, I think it was episode 2 of this series, we curtailed the Trans-Rapid network as far as Guard City, and then built the new extension down to the south to Bar City. So this was not my idea, I'll admit that. This was an idea by George Da Silva, who I will talk about again in just a second. But his suggestion was to reuse some of the old track bed from the Trans-Rapid network and actually use it for normal rail traffic. So that's what we've done here. I always had in my mind that the west coast routes would have services that terminate at Motherboard Falls, but excuse me, let me just shut my door, there we go. But this is actually an extension of that, because there's only really 2 terminus platforms at Motherboard Falls, and they're currently both oversaturated with the Western Reaches services. So it actually made a lot of sense. I keep saying actually, that's really annoying, I apologise. It made a lot of sense to build these new platforms here, because effectively, let me just get to that part of the map on my laptop. I've forgotten how many platforms. I think there's 7. I might be wrong. God, this is a big map. I'm trying to scroll across it. Let me just count how many platforms there are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, 7. There are actually 7. I was right. So there are 7 platforms that can now be used not just by cross-country trains, but also by Great Western trains that have come from GSP and travelled up that line. And actually, at this point, I will say that the cross-country west line is no longer called the cross-country west line. I have the... where is it? I need to find my Patreon. There it is. My Patreon spreadsheet, because George Da Silva has now qualified for my Patreon tiers. I won't say which tier, I'll try and keep that a bit secret, but one thing that, that does come with his tier is he can name or rename a route, and he chose the cross-country west line, and he has renamed it the Western Country line. So I am going to have to remember to refer to it from now on as the Western Country line. Along with that, he also had the option to rename a franchise. The Guard City Great Eastern franchise is no longer called that. It is now called the Eastern United Trains franchise. Quite a novel name, actually. I quite like it. I'm quite a fan of that. Plus, he has also named 3 areas of Bar City. I have changed all of these names, by the way, so these are now official, set in stone. The 3 areas of Bar City are Thorngate, Brookside and Sargate. I can't show you those in this episode, but I can tell you that they have been renamed. One of which is sort of central Bar City, the other 2 are sort of suburbs of Bar City. All the stations that were around those areas have also been renamed accordingly as well. So a huge thanks to George Silva for supporting the channel for well over 3 months. In fact, he's been supporting me for I think it's almost a year now, actually, on Patreon, as well as just watching the videos and sharing the content. That's always very much appreciated as well. The reason I'm telling you all of this is it's another plug, really. If you want to have routes named or franchises named or areas of Bar City, the best and easiest way to do that is to support me on Patreon. Any tier qualifies you to have something named in your... I keep saying in your honor, but it's not. It's named by your choice within the map. The basic tier allows you to name or rename a branch line. Intermediate allows you to name or rename an intermediate route. Intermediate Plus, you can name or rename a mainline route. Silver, you can name or rename a mainline route and also name or rename a small area of Bar City, maximum of 1 area. Gold, you can name or rename a mainline route and a small or medium franchise. You can also name up to 3 areas of Bar City. And then Excelsior, you can name or rename a mainline route and any unclaimed franchise. Yeah, any unclaimed franchise of any size. You can also name or rename up to... I thought it was 5, but apparently it's 3 areas of Bar City. Oh yeah, because it's any area of Bar City rather than size dependent. So yeah, I've talked for way too much on that particular section because we've moved on to section B of the episode. So section A was just connecting those platforms at Morningpool Falls to the Western Country Line. We've also built some new stations there, you might have seen as well. Plus we did some signalling at the junction and stuff like that. So that's all plumbed in and working. This section here is actually the section that I'm most pleased with. So you might remember last episode I planned to connect Drunnington and Tenfing Bridge, which is on the West Winds line, via this line that you can see on the map right now, down to Guard City Great Winfield Airport, where it would connect with the Great Western line. That has now changed slightly. We now have 2 branches coming from Great Winfield, one of which goes straight through the centre of Wenfingfield here and actually connects up with the Western Reaches, at Wenfingfield Western, as well as also having new stations at Wenfingfield South and Wenfingfield Central. And then it continues running north, and this is actually the line that now connects up to Drunnington and Tenfing Bridge. The other line, which you'll see me build in the next part of this episode, which will be coming up shortly, now actually connects to the Western Country Line just north of Guntwood. And in the original Guntwood North station is now called Guntwood Central, I believe. And there's a new Guntwood North station that has been built on this new branch line. Like I said, I'm really happy. I haven't got trains running on it yet. I haven't done this. Actually, I might have done the speed limit charts thinking about it. But this is really the first new route that has been built in this series. And there's 2 branches of this new route. So they have been built to the Realism Initiative standards. They've also been built with correct waypoint placement, correct platform placement. The speed limit has been set. I think the bog standard is 60 miles per hour on this route. Plus, where it connects at Drunnington and Tenfing Bridge, I don't think I built this on camera, but there is actually a new train care facility that's been built at Drunnington and Tenfing Bridge for the West Winds line. Basically, the train's going all the way up to Honingville to get serviced. It's adding far too much journey time to the actual timetable. The actual schedule, each service, the little suburban services out of GSE, their overall timetable is 12 hours long because they have to keep going up to Honingville to get serviced. So I've built this new facility to actually have all the trains that go on the West Wind line will use this new facility. Although I might still have trains. One thing I'm planning in the future, even if they don't ever earn revenue, is just to have works trains going between all the train care facilities. So like maybe a diesel locomotive pulling an EMU, that kind of thing. Just to make it look like there's actual relationships between all these facilities and they're not just independent entities, which really they are. That's a notification from YouTube, believe it or not. So yeah, this new line, the 2 branches, they look really good. I like it. I mean, it sounds a bit bad, I suppose, but I do like bulldozing lines through the middle of cities and just building rail routes that look like they were actually there before the city grew up around it. So the Guard City Overground Network is a very good example of that, and that in many cases was actually built first and then the town grew around it. This case, particularly through Wenfingfield, I did just bulldoze a line and build a rail route through there. But when it all grows back and the trees all come back and the grass turns green again, it actually looks really nice and it works really well. So yeah, for the next bit of the episode, I'm actually going to talk about some rail news that's going on. So I've told you what actually goes on in the episode here. We're just about, I think this route is just about to reach Drunnington and Tenfing Bridge, and then you'll see me build it in the next section up towards Guntwood. But in rail news, the big bit of rail news that I really want to talk about is High Speed 2 have unveiled the design for the new station, the new super hub, inverted commas, that they're building at Old Oak Common. For those of you who don't know, Old Oak Common is an a very sort of well-known area in London in terms of rail history. The Great Western franchise has a depot built there. Crossrail also has a depot built there. Who else has a depot? I think that's it currently. But in the days of steam and even in the days of early diesels, there was a huge locomotive motive power depot built at Old Oak Common. Sadly, a lot of it is now gone. The last remnants were the Great Western and Crossrail, and I think it's the Crossrail depot is remaining. Oh yeah, the North Pole depot, which is a really weird name for a rail depot, but it used to be the Eurostar depot. It's now owned by Hitachi. It's where the Intercity Express trains that Hitachi have built for the Great Western franchise, they're all maintained at North Pole depot. But there used to be this, it's kind of like a triangular shape, the land, and there used to be a section in the middle that was all old stabling sidings, and I think there was a freight depot there at one point, and locomotive servicing facilities. That's all been demolished. Great Western Depot has now moved. Instead of being located in London, all the stock that was based there is now being spread out around the country a little bit more. So I think it's Lyra Depot, I think that's how you pronounce it. Down in the West Country, that's taken on some of them. Exeter, I think, have also taken some, and I think up towards Worcester, there's another depot there, where the rest of the trains have gone. But in that plot of land, there is going to be a super hub built that will connect Crossrail to the Great Western to London Overground via 2 external stations that will be built. Can't speak now. Which will be built on the respective Overground branch lines. And then the big thing is there is a high-speed 2 station that's being built there as well. Much like Stratford International on high-speed 1 is the first major interchange outside of St Pancras, Old Oak Common will be the first major interchange station out of Euston on high-speed 2. And looking at the design, it looks incredible. Not much about high speed 2 has actually got me excited. The fact that it's a new rail route in England is good, or the UK I should say, not just England, because it will eventually go up to Scotland as well. The thing I guess that's turned me off the most about it is the fact that not many people are actually happy that it's going ahead, which always makes me think it's going to get cancelled. So I'm kind of not allowing myself to get carried away with it in case it does get cancelled and the disappointment that will come from that. But just looking at this design for Old Oak Common, it's kind of lit that fire again, if that makes sense. So the Great Western line will have, I think it's 8 platforms at Old Oak Common, and then High Speed 2 will have 6 platforms, and they will be built underground. And actually, just looking at the design, one of my favourite railway memories growing up as a kid was the first time I ever went to Disneyland Paris. We took the Eurostar, but for one reason or another we had to change at Lille onto a TGV, and I always remember sitting in like a waiting lounge kind of room at Lille, looking down onto the platforms, and every now and then seeing a TGV or a Eurostar go past, and that's what this design reminds me of. So there's a main concourse for Old Oak Common, below which are the high-speed platforms, and then I think it's to the south, I'm trying to get my geography right, I think to the north of the site is the Crossrail depot, and then to the south of the concourse is the Great Western platforms. I'm just counting them up. I think there are 8 on the Great Western route. I think 4 of which will be slow lines, 4 of which will be fast lines, something like that. But the fact that it's an open-air concourse, it's kind of built like Stansted Airport, the terminal building there. So it's all big and airy, and then every now and then there's kind of like a shaft that you can look down and you can see the high-speed platforms. It looks really nice. It also reminds me a little bit of Schiphol Airport, where the railway station is there. If you've been to these places, hopefully you know what I'm talking about. If not, then I probably just sound like I'm talking gibberish. But it looks like a really nice design. They've really thought it through. It's going to be very expensive, no doubt. And hopefully the project goes ahead so that this all gets built. That's the kind of angle I'm coming from. I can kind of see where people are coming from when they say that High Speed 2 is a bit of a white elephant, but I think it's one of these things where if you build it, the growth will come from that, rather than the growth will spur now because it's been announced. A bit like High Speed 1 wasn't particularly welcomed when it was first announced, but now it's up and running, There have now been some political complications, which I won't go into, regarding the future of the Eurotunnel. But the actual result of moving to St Pancras and making it an entire high-speed line was quite encouraging to begin with. And it's only events external to the rail industry that have sort of cast a shadow over it slightly. So hopefully Old Oak Common goes ahead. It looks really good. Go check it out if you want to see more about it. I think just a quick Google search for Old Oak Common High Speed 2 should yield some results. But yeah, fingers crossed that it all goes ahead and actually turns out quite well. The other thing I want to talk about, and I mentioned Crossrail just now, is the Aventra trains. I've sort of made it clear from the get-go that I don't really like the Aventras. I like the Electrostars. I think they're very practical. They always had teething problems when they were first introduced, but over time Bombardier refined the design and created a good fleet of vehicles. Sadly, the Aventras just seem to have a never-ending problem flow. So the Crossrail trains are, they work now. They do go backwards and forwards between Paddington and Hayes and Harlington, and also between Liverpool Street and Shenfield. So outside of the central core section of Crossrail, they're actually doing their job. I do know that one of the delays to Crossrail was trying to get the system and the trains and the signalling all working in the tunnels. For those of you that, again, aren't aware, there was a program on the BBC a couple of weeks ago now called the £15 billion Railway. I thought it was Series 2, but apparently it was Series 3, and they did look into sort of the testing of the trains and some of the problems that have happened with the project. They didn't reveal too much. I remember a long time ago now saying that someone just needs to come out and tell the truth about what's happened. That still hasn't happened. Even the inquiries that are going on aren't actually revealing anything at this stage. That's a little bit disappointing. But the Aventra trains, to move away from Crossrail, clearly have problems outside of Crossrail. So London Overground ordered, I think it was... Actually, I don't even want to guess what the number is, of new trains for London Overground. I think I just said that actually. Class 710 Aventras. They're 4-car units. They're supposed to work on the Gospel Oaks Barking line as well as reinforcing services. I think it's the Watford DC lines and the East London line is where they're also going to be operating. It's been almost a year since they were supposed to have been brought into service, and there's still no time frame on how long it's going to be before we can actually start using them. The reason being is software problems, and I hate that term because that could be anything. That could literally mean that the computer won't shut the doors properly, to the computer that controls the train speed is currently making it go 6 times faster than it's supposed to. It doesn't mean anything to say software problems, and again, no one's really being very transparent about what is actually going on, but I always had this hunch that the Aventras were one of these like fad trains. So with any industry, I always compare it to the roller coaster industry, or if it's about roller coasters, I try and compare it to the rail industry. So in the roller coaster industry, there's a company at the moment called Rocky Mountain Construction. They're a very good company. They're led by some very, very good people. But they have become what I like to call a fad company, in that, a few years ago, no one had ever heard of them. They were brought on to do a job. They did it very well, and now everyone wants to work with them. And I kind of get that vibe with Bombardier and the Aventras, in that they were a new design for Crossrail. They look ugly as hell. I'll try and refrain from saying that throughout the rest of the video. They're not particularly nice to look at, the Crossrail trains. I don't particularly like them. The ones for London Overground are even worse. But since that Crossrail order was announced, suddenly, London Overground have ordered a fleet. Greater Anglia have ordered a fleet. West Midlands Trains have ordered a fleet. Every new franchise that was up for renewal after the Crossrail order was confirmed, they've all ordered Aventras. And the first fleet, the Crossrail fleet, are now in service. But the second fleet, the London Overground fleet, are a long way off service still. Which means that in a year's time, the other new trains that are supposed to be entering service on the other franchises will also be delayed. And this goes back to Thameslink in Northern last year, missing the deadline for the timetable change because the new trains weren't ready on time. That's only going to happen again now, because too many companies have relied on new hardware for fixing a problem that they could have fixed elsewhere. The Aventras are not good. They're not working. The ones that on Crossrail are working, but the rest of them aren't, because they're using a new system, whereas the Crossrail trains actually used a system that was derivative from the Electra Stars. So because the Aventras on the Goblin line, Gospel Oaks Barking line, are late, some of the old Capital Stars, which are Electra Stars built for London Overground, the Class 378s, they're having to be adapted now to work on the Gospel Oaks Barking line. So they have to be reduced from 5 carriages to 4, because the platforms are only long enough for 4 carriages, and as a result of that, some of the Turbo Stars, which were also built by Bombardier, are being delayed, being transferred to West Midlands, where they're supposed to be entering service by the end of this month. So it's a huge cascading effect of more and more companies are having to let down their customers because one company decided that they relied too much on a single design that hadn't even been tested at the time that the order was put in. Now the easiest way to have avoided that, and this is very easy for me to say because I know it's not actually as easy as this, but when London Overground were considering purchasing new trains, what they actually should have done was bought more 378s, more Capital Stars. Now I know that Bombardier were keen to actually stop development of the Electra Stars and move on to the Aventras. So I think it was a Southern train was the last Electra Star ever built, and it was either last year or the year before. I can't remember now. Not that it matters too much for this story. So the company Bombardier were clearly eager to move away from that old design and onto the new design, which is fine. What I think was a bit short-sighted though was that everyone moved on from the old design. And it really is costing now. So all the problems from last year, which we were told would never happen again, I have a horrible feeling they are going to happen again for the exact same reasons. And it's like I said, the Aventura is a fad train. It's new and it's shiny and people just want to buy it and want to ride it because it's new. It hasn't so far proved that it's better than an alternative. And I don't think it will for a long time. Years and years from now, we'll probably still be talking about it and how badly implemented the introduction was. The sad thing is, up in Scotland, and again I've said this before in this series, they actually took some of the old networkers, the 365s, which are personally one of my favourite trains on the network, because they look good, they're practical, they're fast, they're comfortable, and they look good. I'll say that again, they look good. I like trains that look good because at the end of the day the train is the image of the company as well as the... like no one looks at a station necessarily and says, oh that's really nice, unless it's like King's Cross or St Pancras. Likewise, no one looks at the bridges unless they're fantastic structures like the viaduct at Berwick, or near where I live there's a place called Digswell Viaduct, I think it's also called Welling North Viaduct, and you know they're marvels to look at. But no one looks at just a bridge over a road and says that's the image of the railway. They look at the trains, they look at the staff, they look at the branding, you know, the livery, which again comes back to the trains. The networkers look really nice. They're a design that I think should have been utilised more, but they haven't been. Anyway, the 365s went up to Scotland because there was a delay in the new 385s, which were built by Hitachi. The 385s are now entering service, which means the 365s are going to be redundant again. So why not use those? They're 4-car units, like London Overground needs. They are actually dual voltage. All trains built to overhead electrification are capable of dual voltage use. So particularly the 365s, because they have relatives, again inverted commas, in the 465s, which are third rail trains. The 365s can be converted to run on third rail as well. Why not use them? You know, they're not used by anything else right now, so why not just use those instead of converting other stock? Again, it's not as easy as that because there's loading clearances and all that kind of thing that needs to be considered. But if there's a route somewhere that's crying out for electric trains, and there's a whole fleet of electric trains that are still perfectly usable, that have nowhere else to go, why not put those two problems together and solve both? I don't know. I don't run the rail industry. I don't know if there's other factors involved. Maybe there are. Like I said, there are things like load gauging clearances, but they had to do that up in Scotland as well, and they managed that perfectly fine. So, who knows? I always think if the 319s can get service elsewhere in the country, then the 365s easily could. Anyway, that's that. We are about to move on to the final part of the episode, which is actually the longest part, believe it or not. So the first 3 parts of the episode, we reconnected the platforms at Morningpool Falls. We built the new route between Guard City, Great Winfield Airport and the West Winds line at Dronnington and Tenfing Bridge. We have now connected the route between Wenfingfield South and Guntwood North. So we can now, in theory, run trains between Guard City, St. Peter and Sunnington via that route rather than the Western Country route. Western Country line. I will learn it. I promise I will learn it. It's because I used the old name for like 2 years and the new name's only been around for 2 weeks. So you'll have to bear with me. So this last section isn't actually anything to do with the previous 3 sections, but it's something that I had to do anyway, so I thought I might as well record it and add it to this, because it does fit in with the theme of laying new rails, which is the title of the episode. So the overground connections at Guard City St. George badly needed updating, particularly the curve, which you saw me replace at the very start there. Where those 2 bridges end, the curve there was so tight that even at a 30-mile-an-hour speed restriction, it kind of felt a bit excessive. So I needed an excuse to redo all of this anyway, and I kept looking at that curve and just thinking it needs doing. So I have now widened the curve, or extended the curve, should we say. And then from that, all of the approaches into the western platforms of Guard City St. George, so all the suburban platforms, including the centre rail through platforms, have all now been reprofiled. The 3rd rail connection to the DC line towards Flaham Junction, that's now been built onto new viaducts, as you can see there. The 2 other lines that go towards Flaham Junction with the overhead electrification, they have also been built on new viaducts, which I think I've just placed in there as well. The configuration of the platforms now is slightly different, so instead of having opposing lines on the... Hang on, I'm trying to think of a good way to say this. Instead of having the up and down lines all together, so 3 ups and then 3 downs, I've actually done up, down, up, down, up, down. The reason I did that was because it was actually easier to do it that way than it was to split the 2 approaching lines and then somehow connect them with the other approaching line from the Great Northern Line. And I've done a very bad job of explaining what I'm actually talking about. Basically, I've simplified it. One of the big things that I said to myself when I first started this series was things were going to be built to look complicated but actually be very simple. So a lot of my new station designs have been simplified considerably. So you might have seen that in the last clip, the clip before the last clip at Dronnington and Tenfing Bridge, the platform configuration is actually based on real life examples rather than my idea of a real life example. So there's only a single track that runs through those platforms without actually having a platform on that particular track, which might in theory sound a bit weird, but in practice it works really well. Much like Cambridge Station only has 1 through line, all the other tracks have platforms on them. Plus you have the 1 real long platform, which I think is platform 3, and then 4 and 5 is an island platform built to the east of that, which I did replicate on the last map, not this one, but I think I will replicate it on this map at some point as well. So again, I'm looking at the actual rebuild that I've done on my screen here, and the lines in and out are a lot more simple. The overground lines to the very far west of the site, they've all been rebuilt with the realism initiative in mind, so they're all bi-directional lines apart from the one which is always the outline. New waypoints have been built, some of the platforms have been re-electrified, the signalling has been changed slightly as well. I do lots of saving during this because I have been getting some crashes again, which is a little bit annoying. But again, from a Google search, I think it's because I've enabled more new GRFs in the game. So as someone put it on one of the forums, if you do that, warranty void, effectively. So it tends to be because trains crash and then that causes the game to crash. I thought the problem was fixed, but I think it's not as easy as just fixing the problem, as it were. There are actual other factors that need to be considered. Plus, I actually take responsibility for it crashing, because I've obviously meddled with the files that I'm not supposed to meddle with, and that's caused performance issues. So no one's to blame really except for myself. So it's inconvenient, but I also know the reason. That's what I'm getting at. Where was I going with this? I can't even remember now. Something to do... Oh, yeah. So I have to reset trains a lot to try and stop the crashing, which means that I also save the game a lot, even more so than I would normally do. But anyway, let's talk about the new setup here at GSG. So it's quite simple in that we have 4 platforms in the terminating section are dual voltage. All 6 platforms in the through section are dual voltage. The reason I've only done 4 for the terminus platforms is because all the platforms that are connected to the Great Northern route, they don't need to be dual voltage, because it's only ever overhead electrified trains that will be calling there. Likewise, the 2 westernmost platforms are only overhead electrification, because they're only going to be used by the overground loop that is overhead electrification. Now, in theory, I could do dual voltage there as well, because when you get to Slenston, the voltage changes anyway. But I might have some services just go from GSG to Slenston and use the little sidings that I've got there, which are just overhead. Again, they don't have to be dual voltage. The 4 platforms immediately after the 2 westernmost are dual voltage, because they serve both the overground loops clockwise and anti-clockwise, and also the DC line up towards Flame Junction. Likewise with the waypoints, I have 2 sets of 4 waypoints, 4 for the overground loops clockwise and anti-clockwise, and 4 for the DC line as well. So we have maximum opportunity for trains to arrive and leave in all 3 directions on the overground section. I've also done, I can't remember if this is actually in this episode or not, I think it is, I've done a major rebuild of the approach lines to Guard City St. Christopher, which was also part of this rebuilding the overground project, I suppose is the right word. So the previous setup was an absolute mess. And, you know, in London, there are sections of track, particularly around the South London line, where it is a bit of a mess. There's lines crossing each other and diving under each other and all sorts of things going on, which I tried to replicate with this section, but I kind of got it wrong. So the new setup, again, looks very complicated, but is actually very simple. So Little Flanville Station was previously... I think there it's a 2-track station. It's now a 6-track station. There are 6 platforms, 4 of which are on the overground loop, 2 of which continue up towards, I think it's Bunhattan, on the northern overground spur out of Guard City. The other 2, the centremost 2 platforms, are on the overground loop, but they also then duck under the line out of St. Christopher and go towards GSG. And then the final 2 are from Guard City St. Christopher that then connect up with the line toward Bunhattan. Currently, there is no connection between GSC and the overground loop in the clockwise direction, but there is in the anti-clockwise. There was a reason behind this, and I can't remember what it was. There is in theory a way of connecting if you follow the loop round as far as Gloucester Gardens. The old diverging lines there are still in place, so trains can swap over, and I might even have a service that exploits that. In fact, you can see here I'm doing the rebuild now. I think everything you see on screen is how it looks to me looking at it on my laptop now. I don't think I did any off-screen adjustments. So the metro is also going to be changed as part of this project. There is a new station that is being built. So currently at Little Flanville, you're seeing there there's metro platforms as well as the overground platforms. That is now no longer the case. So Barnwell Arches, which is on the viaducts out of GSC, immediately north of that, where the viaduct ends, there's now a new 4-platform station called Flanway Gardens, and that is the station that the metro now connects to. So Little Flanville is now a overground only station, and it's now 3 times bigger than it used to be. Likewise, Barnwell Crescent, which is to the west of Little Flanville, that is now a 4-track overground station with the 2 metro platforms towards GSE also still in situ. Again, it was for simplification reasons. I'm just looking at this again. Yeah, no, sorry, I did get it right. I was about to say maybe I got it wrong with the GSC connections to the loop, but I did get it right. Barnwell Crescent is actually a more fitting name now than it was before, because there's like a crescent moon shape with the way that the tracks connect to GSC. So I thought that was quite a nice fitting name. Overall, the 2 branch lines that I built in the middle of this episode I'm quite happy with, but this rebuild of the overground loop here is the thing I feel I'm most happy with. I should at this point say that the order in which you're seeing the footage that I've recorded is not the order in which I recorded it. So there's actually, I think it's episode 15.5. Yeah, so this is episode 14. There will be a 14.5, probably over the weekend, where I will show you a tutorial for timetabling trains. And I will actually be doing that tutorial whilst I'm recording the time-lapse footage for episode 15, which is creating services out of GSMA. And then episode 15.5 is a rebuild of GSMA, particularly the overground section between New Rennington and Stillington, and also the lines coming out of GSMA in general. And the main reason I've recorded it in the wrong order like this is because I want to get overground services running again around the city. Currently, the HLR is back up and running at this point. I didn't do it on camera because it was quite a long process. I think it took me about 7 hours to get it working completely in the end, which is about twice as long as it normally takes to do something like that. So that's not been recorded, but I will show you trains running on it in the not too distant future. You can just see I'm rebuilding the platforms here at Little Flanville. The next thing I wanted to get running was the overground, and then I'll get the metro running as well. All of these things I will probably be doing off camera, but the heavy rail services, so the stopping suburban services out of GSMA, I will be doing next full episode 15, so you guys get to see what it is, or that's the last piece of the puzzle, effectively, because GSC and GST are overground only stations, whereas GSMA is the last mainline terminus station that actually needs to be added to the Guard City service schedule list. I'm trying to think of the right words. It's the last terminus station that needs services adding to it. That's the simple way of saying it. So the rebuild that you see me do here is part of not just the overground, but also the in fact, this section not as much, but the section on the other side of the city near Rindingwell, that's all going to be used by that one suburban service that goes between GSMA and GSE, but it does use the overground loop. So I was getting the overground loop up to spec anyway. The actual overground loop at the time of me recording this audio now has speed limit sheets, which you can view via the link in the description below. So that's all done, which is a big plus. It's taken me a long time to get all of this stuff done, but I'd say it's worth it in the long run because it's very satisfying to actually see these things working. So yeah, this is the project that's probably given me the most satisfaction. It's just this little U-bend here of track out of GSC, because it was the bit that I hated the most looking at on the old map in the Majeffries network. This was the bit that I liked working with the least. So to actually get it rebuilt, to get it working, also it's employing ideas from other people about station rebuilds and new tracks and waypoints and upgraded signalling and all that kind of stuff. Plus it's given me an excuse to rework the metro, which is, after I've done the overground, the metro is the missing puzzle piece in terms of the Guard City infrastructure. So the 2 metro lines that actually interact with what I've built here, we have the, I think it's the Plintbridge line, I think is what I called it, that runs past Plintbridge Parkway. It currently terminates up at Gunway Bridge, but I will actually be pulling that back, probably to Gunway Central, and have it terminate there. But this is the Plint Bridge line that you can see on the... trying to give a reference point for you. Where the track curves round in that U shape, there's a metro line that runs through the middle of that. That's the Plint Bridge line, currently. The one that used to connect to Flanville, Little Flanville, that now doesn't, that's actually the Flaham line, and it runs all the way up to Plinhill, I think it is? No, Little Sindhead. And there it joins the overground DC lines and then runs all the way up to Flaham Junction. What I'm actually going to do, because there is a bit at Gondingbury where the two metro lines cross over one another, and I'm actually going to use that as an excuse to have what is currently the Plint Bridge line actually become the Flaham line, and have what's currently the Flaham line actually become the Plint Bridge line. Because that little section where the two metro lines cross each other, that was built in a bit of a rush and wasn't very well thought out and implemented. So I'm going to rebuild it and do it to a new design, and actually build some new stations and get rid of some of the old ones that don't really work very well, and actually make those two metro lines a little bit more streamlined, because then I can have metro services from Halliday Circus, say, or GSG, that run all the way up to Flaham Junction, and then some of the metro lines that from the south can then go up towards Flaham. Hang on. No, sorry. The Plint Bridge line will connect to services to GSG and beyond, and then services from the south of the metro loop will connect up towards Flaham. That's what I meant to say. I think I got that out right. I'll explain it more when I do that rebuild. I'll do it in a live episode on camera, because it won't take long. It'll probably be an hour maximum just to do the reconfiguration of the two lines, and I can explain it a lot better whilst I'm actually doing it, because I can show you guys the exact bits that I'm talking about rather than trying to pick map reference points that people can relate it to. The long and short of it is I have got plans for that section of the metro, because it's kind of the ugliest bit of the metro is that little section there. Plus with the rebuild out of GSC, it's given me a chance to already reconfigure some of the road and rail around this part of the map. Particularly Little Flanville is a lot smaller than it used to be, because one of the metro lines does now cut through the middle of it. But the surrounding area has now been given some space to grow because of that. So the metro tracks have been built on more embankments than they were before, plus the road avenue that we had, I can't remember what it's called now, but it's the one that runs all the way down to Victoria. I've actually reprofiled that as well to cross the overground tracks to the west, and then travel straight up to GSE, and then from GSE curve back around towards where it used to run. And the reason I did that is so I didn't have those two ugly bridges covering the tunnels and some of the housing even that was being built around that section of track. Hopefully I've explained this well. I don't think I have, but I'll watch this back before I upload it, because sometimes I say things when I'm recording and I sort of think back and think, what the hell was that? And then when I actually watch the video, it flows a lot better than I thought it did. Even that was a really bad explanation, but hopefully you know what I mean. When you record audio on the fly, like I do a lot, you do sometimes say the wrong thing, or you try to say something and something else comes out instead. So it is kind of nice to be able to watch it back and see, oh yeah, actually that did make sense. So in terms of rail news, I think that's everything. I've had my own personal opinion about the Adventurers. I think deep down, when the teething problems are sorted, I'll probably like them a little bit more. But I did just see it as this fad that, oh, it's new and it's popular, so everyone must have one kind of thing. And then, I mean, we'll see how that's turned out. The other interesting thing, hopefully I've got enough time to actually say this, hydrogen trains are currently the new thing, like the new power source for railways. So Viva Rail have actually unveiled a design in the last month for a hydrogen powered train. When the D trains were first sort of unveiled a few years ago now, the main power sources were electric, diesel and battery, but they did say at the time that hydrogen was a possibility. I know that in Germany, hydrogen trains I'm trying to remember who makes them. I think it's Alstom. Actually makes hydrogen-powered trains that do operate in Germany. Yeah, Alstom's Island. It's a hydrogen-powered multiple unit. So they're actually called HMUs, hydrogen multiple unit trains. The interesting thing I've read actually is the IMechE, which is the Institute for Mechanical Engineers. They have come out and said that hydrogen is not actually a feasible replacement for electrification. So they can still power trains and they work perfectly fine, but a lot of electrification projects are being cancelled, and one of the reasons given is that hydrogen trains are now a possibility. But the IMechE have actually come out and said that that's not a good option. Like, hydrogen does not replace mainline electrification, because in theory hydrogen trains are just like battery powered trains in that they can only run so many miles before they need refueling. So that's an interesting development. Won't talk too much more about that now because we are running out of time, but it's interesting that that happens to have been announced around about the same time that more and more companies are producing designs for hydrogen powered trains. And again, it felt a bit like a fad. Viva Rail, everyone should know by now, I like Viva Rail. I think what they're doing is fantastic. It should be explored more. Upcycling trains, exactly what I was saying with the 365s. If a train company or any company even buys the old 365s and upcycles them, I think they can get another 40 years out of them personally. So the fact that Viva Rail, who are a company that I support and think are doing really good, are starting to lean towards a technology that's actually been stated is not a suitable replacement, I think it's interesting to see what will come from that. Anyway, I'm just about out of time, guys, so I'm going to start wrapping up. Thank you very much, everybody, for watching. Last week was a bit of a disappointment in terms of view count. I won't dwell on that too much. I kind of made my point at the time. This episode, as you all know by now, is not being premiered for that reason. Even though last week's episode, I think, did actually break viewing records for the channel, the fact that only one person watched it when it was being premiered was a waste of my time, personally, because something people don't really realise is Thursday nights I would rather be doing something different than sitting watching one of my old videos back. But because of the way YouTube's premiere system works, I have to be there to answer people's questions or talk in the chat, things like that. It's very unprofessional to actually do a premiere and then not be there, I always find. So I try and be there as much as possible. But because only one person turned up, and they turned up, I think it was the last 20 minutes of an hour-long video, I sort of wasted my evening. Just sat there watching one of my old videos, which, like I said, I don't think anyone really wants to do. So the next few weeks there won't be any premieres on the channel. We'll see how things go in the near future, but right now I've kind of made my mind up on that. So like I said, won't dwell too much on that. Sorry to end on a negative, but I felt it had to be said, because once again people ask me to do something and then when I do it they don't reciprocate their end of their end of the bargain. See what I mean about can't get words out half the time. And with that, I will end the episode. So thank you very much to those of you who did watch last week's episode after it was premiered and who have watched this week's episode. The viewership is still much appreciated. The like count is something that still needs to be boosted. If you... Let me think. I've got to remember my spiel because it's been a while since I did it. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and of course if you're enjoying the series. And I've already said the like count needs to improve. Head over to my Reddit community. Drop some comments below the post for this video if you have ideas or concerns or anything like that. Besides that, if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, be sure to hit the subscribe button. If you have already subscribed to the channel, thank you guys for continuing support. And until next time, I will see you soon.